The first time I met Brenda Geller, she was standing on my dock like she owned the place, clipboard in hand and sunglasses reflecting the late afternoon sun. I was still in my waders, dragging in the last of the trout lines when she turned around and said, "This structure is not in compliance with HOA shoreline use guidelines. It will need to be removed or reclassified as shared property." I blinked. "Excuse me." She tapped her pen against the clipboard like it was a gavel. "Your dock. The HOA has reviewed satellite imagery and determined that it's encroaching on common use shoreline. We'll be converting it into a community dock. You'll still be allowed to use it, of course." That's when I started laughing. Not a chuckle full-on, bent over, hand on my knees kind of laugh. Brenda didn't appreciate that. "I fail to see what's funny," she said, narrowing her eyes. "You might want to sit down for this," I said, stepping onto the dock and nodding toward the edge. "You're about to be real disappointed." She didn't move. "As HOA vice president, I have every right to enforce our community guidelines." I dropped my gear on the deck, pulled my phone out of the side pocket and opened the county records app. "Brenda, I bought this house 6 years ago." "You know that? What you don't know or didn't bother to check is that I also bought all the land from the road to the waterline, all 3 acres, including the entire shoreline. That dock, it's not encroaching, it's sitting on private property." Her lips twitched. "That can't be right." "It is," I said, flipping the screen toward her. "See that, parcel 217B, that's me. The HOA may own the road, but everything from here to the lake is mine, including the dock, including the boat ramp, including the little bench you've been using for your morning yoga." Brenda stared at the screen like it had just called her a liar. "Well, that doesn't change the fact that this community has a right to access the lake." "No," I said calmly, "they don't, not through my land. There's a public park with a boat launch 2 miles down the road, but this stretch, it's private, always has been. You'd know that if you read the bylaws instead of trying to rewrite them." That's when she started sputtering about how the HOA would be reviewing this matter further and how I'd hear from the board. I watched her stomp off the dock and nearly trip on a root. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. What she didn't know was that I'd already seen this coming. Brenda had been sniffing around for months, asking my neighbors about unused waterfront space and community development opportunities. She had no idea I was one step ahead. I locked up the boathouse that night with a pit in my stomach. I knew Brenda wasn't going to drop this. People like her never did. And the HOA, they'd back her, at least at first. They always did, but I had something they didn't: receipts. The knock came at 6:42 a.m. 2 days later. Not a polite tap, but a full-fisted pounding that rattled the front door like it owed someone money. I opened it wearing my robe and holding a mug of coffee, expecting a package or maybe one of the local kids selling fundraiser coupons. Instead, there stood 2 men in matching navy jackets, one holding a clipboard, the other a rolled-up surveyor's map. Behind them, Brenda hovered with her arms crossed and a self-satisfied tilt to her chin. The taller man spoke first. "Morning. We're with Ridgeview Community Assessments, contracted by the Lakeside HOA. We're here to conduct a land use survey of shoreline parcels as part of a proposed shared access plan." I didn't step aside. "You're on my porch. That surveyor pole better not touch a single inch of my land without a court order." Brenda's voice cut in before either of them could respond. "This is just a preliminary measure, nothing formal. The board voted to initiate an exploratory review. It's all perfectly legal." I tilted my head. "Did you just say you're conducting a review of land that doesn't belong to you?" The second man unrolled the map slowly, as if that would make it less offensive. "We understand you have a unique parcel. We're just verifying the boundaries." I held up my phone again, this time already recording. "This is private property. You've been verbally warned. If any equipment crosses that line, I'll file trespassing charges. Do I make myself clear?" They hesitated. Brenda didn't. She scoffed and waved them forward. "He's bluffing." "The HOA has a right to—" "No, we don't," came a voice from across the street. It was Tom Delgado, a retired firefighter and one of the few people in the neighborhood who still had a spine. He stepped off his porch and walked over, holding his own copy of the community bylaws. "I pulled the plat maps last night. That shoreline's not under HOA jurisdiction. You're pushing something that doesn't exist." Brenda's jaw twitched. "Tom, this doesn't concern you." "It does when you start dragging the HOA into legal liabilities," he said, flipping open the binder in his hand. Page 46, Section 12. The HOA may not initiate or fund surveys on non-HOA property without unanimous board approval and documented landowner consent. The surveyors shifted uncomfortably. One of them muttered, "We weren't made aware of any restrictions." I stared directly at Brenda. "You initiated this, you signed off on it," she pursed her lips. "I acted on behalf of the board." Tom shook his head. "You acted alone. This wasn't discussed in the last meeting. I would know I was there." That was when Brenda's mask started to crack. She turned to the surveyors and said, "We'll handle this internally. Thank you for your time." They didn't argue. They packed up and left without another word. Brenda stayed behind, arms folded tighter than before. "You're being obstinate. If you'd just cooperate, we could make this shoreline an asset. Think of the resale value." I stepped out onto the porch, letting the full weight of my presence push against her words. "This isn't about value, it's about control. You want something that doesn't belong to you, and when you couldn't manipulate your way into it, you tried to force it through back channels." "That's not true." "Then explain the forged minutes." Her eyes flicked. "I made a few calls. The county land office got a request last week for shoreline development permits signed under the HOA's name, dated 3 days before your so-called vote. But the board meeting where that vote supposedly happened never occurred. I confirmed with 3 board members." She didn't respond. "You forged an official document to push a land grab you knew wouldn't pass. That's attempted fraud, Brenda." Tom's eyes widened. "You did what?" Brenda turned red, then pale. "It was just a preliminary draft. I didn't submit anything final." "But you submitted something." I gestured toward the road. "I've got a friend at the county clerk's office. She's already flagged it. You're going to be hearing from someone whose badge isn't made of laminated plastic." Brenda turned and walked away without another word, her stride clipped and uneven. That afternoon, I called in a favor. Detective Marla Kessler had been a friend of my brother's back when he worked for the state police. She'd retired early but still consulted on fraud cases when the city needed backup. I sent her everything: the fake meeting minutes, the permit request, the surveyor invoice billed to HOA funds without authorization. Within 24 hours, she looped in the town's legal department. By Friday, an official notice had been posted to the HOA bulletin board. A formal investigation is underway involving potential misuse of HOA resources and fraudulent documentation. Members are advised not to comment publicly until the matter is resolved. Brenda didn't attend that weekend's community pancake breakfast, but I did, and I wasn't alone. Tom stood by me, along with Carla from Lot 8, whose garden Brenda once tried to fine for growing non-uniform flora, and Jeremy, who'd been cited for parking his work van in his own driveway. For the first time in months, people actually talked to each other instead of whispering behind hedges. "I always thought she was full of it," Jeremy said, pouring syrup over his plate. "But trying to steal a dock, that's a new level." "She's not done yet," Carla muttered. "People like that never are." She was right. Because Monday morning, I found a letter taped to my door, no envelope, no postage. It was printed on HOA letterhead, but the signature line was blank. It read, "Due to ongoing disruptions and lack of cooperation from certain homeowners, the HOA may be forced to reassess membership status and community privileges. Failure to comply with evolving neighborhood standards may result in penalties or suspension of access to shared amenities." I took a photo and dropped it in an email to Marla and the city legal office. Then I printed 10 copies and handed them out to neighbors with a short note. "This was posted illegally. It is not binding. If you received one, keep it." If you didn't expect one soon, we need to meet. That night, 12 households showed up in my garage with folding chairs, notepads, and a shared sense of purpose. I laid out the full timeline, every document, every name, every overreach. I didn't ask them to take sides. I just showed them what had been done behind their backs. We can't let this go, Carla said. We won't, I replied. But we do it right, transparent, documented, legal. Tom tapped his knuckles on the table. We vote to recall the board. Gasps went around the room, but no one objected. I nodded. Then we start tomorrow. Brenda had tried to steal a shoreline and remake it in her image. She was about to find out that the only thing stronger than her fake authority was a community that finally woke up. 3 mornings after the garage meeting, I stood in front of the county clerk's office with a banker's box under my arm. Inside were affidavits from 11 homeowners, a notarized petition calling for a special election, and a stack of printed emails, some from Brenda. Others from board members she had quietly pressured into silence. The clerk, a woman named Marcy with a calm, no-nonsense tone, flipped through the contents and gave a small nod. "Looks like you did your homework," she said, stamping the top page. "You're good to proceed. I'll notify the HOA oversight liaison to schedule the hearing." I stepped outside and exhaled. The air was cool and dry, carrying the scent of pine from the hills to the north. My phone buzzed. A text from Carla. "We're ready whenever you are." By that afternoon, we had secured the community center for the next HOA meeting, this time under the supervision of the county's neighborhood governance representative, who would be present to ensure legality. His name was Conrad Hayes, a tall, even-tempered man in his 50s who had spent 2 decades in municipal dispute resolution. He didn't say much when we met, just asked for the documents and gave a single nod of approval. By the time the meeting started that Friday night, over 30 residents had crammed into the little hall. Folding chairs squeaked against the tile floor. A few stood in the back. Brenda arrived 10 minutes late, wearing a blazer and heels that clicked with every rigid step. She froze at the sight of Conrad seated beside the old podium. "I wasn't informed you'd be here," she said. "One of your members filed a formal petition. I'm here to observe," he replied. Brenda shuffled through her papers but didn't argue. The rest of the board shuffled in behind her, quiet and wary. They took their places at the folding table up front, avoiding eye contact with most of the room. I didn't take a seat. I walked straight to the podium, pulled out a folder, and cleared my throat. "This meeting is being recorded as required by county protocol," I began. "We're here to call a vote for a full recall of the current HOA board due to violations of fiduciary duty, misuse of member dues, and attempted fraudulent acquisition of non-HOA property." There was no applause. Just a tense silence as the weight of the words settled in the air. Brenda stood slowly. "These accusations are based on a misunderstanding. I acted in the best interest of the community." Conrad raised a hand. "Miss Geller, you'll have a chance to respond." "But first, the petitioner has the floor." I nodded to him, then turned back to the room. "I'm not going to waste time rehashing the full timeline. You've all seen the evidence. Unauthorized permits, misused funds, falsified meeting records. But what hasn't been discussed is something deeper. This isn't just about one doc, it's about how easily one person can hijack a system when no one's watching." Jeremy raised his hand. "Can we ask questions?" Conrad nodded. "This is an HOA meeting. Questions are allowed under local code." Jeremy stood. "What about the funds used to pay those surveyors? That invoice went through, right?" Brenda answered quickly. "It was a clerical error. The treasurer approved it without understanding the context." The treasurer, a soft-spoken woman named Denise, stood without looking at her. "That's not true. You told me it had already been approved by the board. I asked for the minutes and you said they were in process." Conrad scribbled something on his notepad. Another neighbor, Florence, from the cul-de-sac stood. "What about the letter some of us got this week? The one threatening to suspend amenity privileges. Who authorized that?" Brenda adjusted her collar. That was a draft meant for internal discussion. It wasn't supposed to be distributed. Tom stood up in the back. Then how'd it end up taped to 12 doors? Brenda didn't answer. Conrad set down his pen. At this point, I need to raise a procedural issue. He turned to face the board. Under county ordinance, any attempt to alter the rights of HOA members through an unsigned, non-voted directive constitutes coercive governance. That's a civil violation. Brenda's mouth opened, then closed. We'll continue, Conrad said, but I'm notifying the county prosecutor's office to review the documentation. If there was intent to intimidate members through unauthorized notices, it may escalate. The room went utterly still. I broke the silence. We're calling a vote. Every homeowner present is entitled to 1 vote per household. Those in favor of a full board recall, raise your hand. Hands rose slowly at first, then rapidly. 26 households in total. That was more than enough. Brenda snapped. You don't understand what you're doing. Replacing the board destabilizes everything. You'll tank property values. You'll create uncertainty. You'll invite litigation. Conrad stood. That's enough. The vote is valid. The recall passes. Effective immediately, this board is dissolved. Her eyes darted from face to face, searching for someone to defend her. No one moved. She turned to me. You think you've won? I stepped forward. I didn't win anything. I just stopped you from taking what wasn't yours. As Brenda stormed out, the door slammed hard enough to rattle the glass. No one followed her. The next morning, the county prosecutor's office confirmed they were initiating a preliminary inquiry into the misuse of HOA funds and the forged permit documents. I forwarded everything I had to Detective Kessler, who had already been quietly digging into Brenda's connections. What she found next shocked even me. Brenda had been quietly running a consulting business on the side, a shell company that billed neighborhood associations for development strategies. She'd used it to funnel small consulting fees back to herself through third-party contractors, including the surveyors who had shown up on my property. It wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. Kessler looped in the state's Financial Crimes Division. Within a week, Brenda's home was searched under a warrant. They seized her laptop, business records, and communications with several other HOAs in the county. Apparently, she'd tried the same shoreline takeover tactic at 3 previous neighborhoods. 2 of them had caved. She hadn't expected a challenge this time. The new board, led by Florence and Tom, wasted no time. They froze all outgoing payments, hired an independent auditor, and hosted a public queue and a session to propose new checks and balances. No one raised their voice. No one had to. Transparency had returned, and with it, a sense of peace. But the real closure came a month later when the county prosecutor announced formal charges: falsification of public records, misuse of HOA funds, and wire fraud. Brenda's shell company was dissolved. Her assets were frozen pending trial. She pled not guilty, of course. But the evidence, printed, time-stamped, and signed, left little room for interpretation. Back at the lake, I rebuilt the bench she once used for yoga. Not for her, but for the neighbors who now walked the shoreline freely, knowing exactly where the property lines were and who had fought to defend them. Tom stopped by one evening as the sun dipped low, casting amber across the water. You know, he said, I've lived here 20 years. Never imagined we'd have a crooked board president trying to run a side hustle through fake permits. I tossed him a cold drink. Crooks don't always wear ski masks. Sometimes they wear name tags and carry clipboards, he chuckled. Well, they picked the wrong dock this time. Yeah, I said, watching the lake settle into stillness. They did. 2 months passed. The lake had thawed early that year, and by mid-March the ice was long gone, replaced by the low, steady ripple of spring runoff. The shoreline had never been so quiet, not because people weren't out there, but because for the first time in a long while, there wasn't a single person trying to control how others enjoyed it. The new HOA board had settled in fast. Every meeting was now public, and every decision was documented and emailed to members within 24 hours. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to one another in years were now organizing cleanup days, planting shared garden beds, and even planning a summer barbecue by the water, something that would have triggered a cease and desist letter under the old regime. But just when the neighborhood began to feel like a real community again, a call came in from Detective Kessler. "Got something you'll want to see," she said. "It's about the surveyor company Brenda used." I drove down to the station that afternoon. Kessler met me in the conference room, a folder already open on the table. Her usual easy confidence had a bite to it this time, like she'd spent the morning chewing glass. She slid a document across the table. "That's a false contractor license. The surveyors she hired. They weren't licensed in the state. They don't even exist in the contractor registry." I blinked. "You're joking." "Nope. Brenda paid a shell company. Bank records show funds from the HOA account were wired to an out-of-state LLC registered 2 years ago to a P.O. box in Arizona. That company lists her cousin as the managing officer." "Let me guess," I said, flipping the page. "Never did any real work." "Correct. We also pulled text messages from her phone during the warrant search. She coached him on what to say if anyone asked. Even sent him a script for pretending to be a project consultant." Kessler stood and started pacing. "That's conspiracy to commit fraud, misappropriation of funds, and operating without a license. The county prosecutor's office is adding state-level charges now." I leaned back in my chair. "How much did she siphon?" "Just under $28,000, all from HOA dues." "Any chance we get it back?" I asked. Kessler's expression didn't change. "Maybe. But that's not the worst of it." She dropped another photo onto the table, this one an aerial shot of the lakefront, taken by a county drone. Bright red lines trace the shoreline, with shaded areas extending deep into a few adjacent parcels. "She'd submitted a second permit," Kessler said. "Not just for your dock, she was drawing up plans to build a rental pier and kayak launch on the lakefront behind 3 other homes. She didn't own any of that land. No. But she was trying to register a conservation easement with the county under a fabricated nonprofit, claiming those parcels were donated for public benefit." I stared at the printout. "That's not just fraud, that's land theft," Kessler nodded. "She was trying to backdoor a tax haven using forged donation paperwork. That's federal." 3 days later, Brenda was arrested again, this time by U.S. Marshals. The charges now included federal wire fraud, falsified tax documents, and attempted land theft through misuse of charitable registration. The arrest warrant listed 9 counts in total. It made the front page of the county paper. Her mugshot ran beside a headline that read, "HOA president accused of orchestrating multi-state fraud scheme." The fallout was instant. The old HOA treasurer, Denise, was cleared of wrongdoing but voluntarily stepped aside, citing stress. Florence brought in a CPA from the city to run the books for a while. A full audit revealed that Brenda had also padded reimbursement forms for neighborhood expenses. She'd billed the HOA for equipment rentals that were never delivered and charged mileage for non-existent trips to supposed vendor meetings. The neighborhood met again the following weekend, this time at the lakefront clearing behind Carla's house. No podiums, no formalities, just coolers, folding chairs, and a bonfire. Jeremy brought his smoker trailer and handed out pulled pork sandwiches wrapped in foil. Someone brought a guitar. Kids ran barefoot through the grass. And for the first time since anyone could remember, the only thing floating across the water were dragonflies and the low hum of laughter. Tom sat beside me, sipping something dark from a thermos. "Did you ever think we'd get here?" I looked out at the lake, where a few kayaks drifted lazily through the reeds. "Not this fast," he nodded. "You know, when Brenda first joined the board, she told me she just wanted to restore order. That's the word she used." "Order?" "She didn't want order," I said. "She wanted control." Florence wandered over, carrying a plate of grilled vegetables. "The real irony, she never even liked the lake, said the bugs were too loud." Tom chuckled. Figures. She tried to own something she didn't even understand. I stood and walked down to the dock, now freshly stained and free of any unauthorized foot traffic. A small wooden sign stood at its base, hand-carved by one of the neighbors. It read, "Privately owned. Community respected." I didn't put it there. Someone else had. I didn't ask who. The next morning, I got a letter in the mail, this one official, with a seal from the district court. Brenda had accepted a plea deal. She'd serve 2 years in minimum security and pay restitution to the HOA. Her cousin would face a separate trial for his role in the fake contractor company. The letter also noted that her eligibility to serve on any housing board, nonprofit, or public advisory committee had been permanently revoked. That night, I pulled out the folder I'd kept from the very beginning. The one with every document, every photo, every email I'd collected. I didn't need it anymore, but I couldn't bring myself to toss it, because the truth is, people like Brenda don't act alone. They thrive in silence, in apathy, in unchecked power. The only way to stop them is to shine a light and keep it there. I set the folder on the highest shelf of the closet just in case. The lake was calm again. Not guarded, not claimed, just calm, and this time it was going to stay that way.